It's not just Iran, but the entire world is now bracing for a potential Israeli retaliation against Iran.
Right, Shivan, but US President Joe Biden is still hopeful and perhaps optimistic that we can avoid an all-out war in West Asia. Biden also said that he will not negotiate in public when asked if he had urged Israel not to attack Iran's oil facilities.
Now, earlier Biden had said he was discussing possible Israeli strikes on Iranian oil sites in retaliation for Tehran's missile barrage on Israel. In comments, that quickly sent oil prices spiraling on Thursday.
What are the plans to allow Israel to strike back against Iran?
First of all, we don't allow Israel. We advise Israel, and there's nothing going to happen today. We'll talk about that later.
Will there be American...
However, uncertainty looms large over the region as the world waits for Israel's response to Tehran's massive missile assault.
The US recognizes that Israel will retaliate after the attack, but Washington is working to shape that response, cautioning against targeting Iran's nuclear facilities. Despite offering support for a counterstrike, the US is wary of a broader conflict and is urging restraint in choosing targets.
US President Joe Biden, after consulting with the G7 leaders following Iran's launch of 200 ballistic missiles on Tuesday, he has set a clear boundary for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The message is clear. Retaliate, but avoid an escalation that could spiral out of control.
Moreover, the head of EU's foreign and security policy, Josep Borrell, also made a strong call for nuclear facilities not to be targeted in the conflict.
El primer mensaje que quiero pasar hoy es la firme petición, exigencia de la Unión Europea para que no se ataquen instalaciones nucleares. La Unión Europea ha estado siempre en una posición firme con respecto al ataque a cualquier instalación nuclear en el mundo. Esta ha sido nuestra posición en Ucrania o en Rusia cuando esta posibilidad se ha presentado.
Having dealt a significant blow to Hezbollah in Lebanon by killing its leader last week and weakening Hamas in Gaza, concerns are that Netanyahu could see this moment as an opportunity to further undermine Iran. The possibility of striking deep into Iranian territory, potentially hitting nuclear sites, is also seen as a real and dangerous temptation.
All right, for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani sends us this report from New York. Listen in.
Tensions between Israel and Iran are escalating, causing U.S. crude oil prices to jump 8% this week. U.S. President Joe Biden made an assurance that Israel would not be attacking Iran on Thursday. However, U.S. officials continue to remain tight-lipped about future plans. The U.S. is advising Israel to exercise restraint. President Biden emphasizing that America advises rather than dictates Israel's actions. The situation nonetheless remains volatile, with concern about not only oil supply disruption, regional conflict escalation, but also global economic impact as well. Iran has warned of a quote-unquote unconventional response if attacked, while the U.S. does seem to seek to limit Israel's response. It's yet to be seen whether or not Israel would take heed. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is What.
And well, for more on this, we're now being joined live by Dr. Alan Burstein from Boston. He's a professor of political science at Tufts University. Welcome to World DNA, Dr. Burstein. First up, U.S. President Joe Biden just said that U.S. can only advise Israel to avoid striking Iranian oil facilities. Biden clearly said that we can only advise Israel. My question to you is that how much influence does U.S. have on Israel's attack on Iran?
Thank you for having me. Good morning. The United States has a lot of influence on the way Israel will carry out this attack. However, the timing has to be taken into consideration. We are now 1 month away from the U.S. elections in the United States, and that is a critical point. The influence that the American president has in the relationship between the American president and the Israeli prime minister in terms of what Israel can do is very, very instrumental. Obviously, the United States helps Israel both with all kinds of weapons and aid packages, but also diplomatically in the United Nations. However, a lot of that depends on who the next president is. And right now, the Israeli prime minister might be feeling, well, no matter what happens in a few months, President Biden is no longer the president. They'll have to forge a new relationship either with a President Harris or with, once again, with President Trump. So that may factor in also to how much Israel is going to listen to what the U.S. administration under President Biden has to say.
Alan, if we've understood anything of Israeli responses till now, they've always been, they'll match the kind of aggression that comes towards them, or it's going to be worse than that. So at this point, what's the magnitude of the Israeli response that you foresee, given the fact that attacking directly is not the only option Israel has? We've seen the pager blast. We saw Ismail Haniyeh being killed in Tehran. Of course, those were allegedly done by Israel. Israel has not said anything on that front. So at this point, how do you reckon that Israel is going to respond?
So I'll say that we have to some extent, challenge that statement that Israel always responds in a more escalatory manner. What we saw in April was quite surprising, actually. Iran, for the first time in history, back in April, launched over 300 projectiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones towards Israel, whereas Israel actually did not publicly ever respond. Much like the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, of course, it was Israel that carried out the attacks that then happened in Iran's nuclear facilities in Isfahan and Natanz. However, Israel officially did not actually launch any counter response to that. We're not likely to see the same thing here. Here we are likely to see an Israeli official response that will come probably from its military directly. However, Israel also has other factors that it needs to consider. It does need to consider the United States. It does need to consider the fact that it is getting more and more embroiled in Lebanon in the last several days. There have been over 9 IDF soldiers that were killed in Lebanon in just a few days of invasion. That's already a much larger pace than was happening in the Gaza Strip. I think Israel will probably going to see a direct retaliation. It may be either towards Iran's allies or towards Iran directly. Could be nuclear facilities, could be other things. However, Israel is probably still going to try to factor in what are the immediate tactical things that it wants to accomplish in Gaza and in Lebanon. Probably will see it in a reaction, but also an attempt to not spiral out. We'll see Israel be able to do something and then say, and now we're done. If Iran wants to retaliate, that's on them. That's probably the game we're seeing right now.
Right, Mr. Boosteen, even U.S. President Joe Biden has said that an all-out war can be avoided at this point of time. You do mention that Israel has to keep multiple factors in account, from the U.S. to how it is embroiled in Lebanon. But I want to seek your perspective on how do you see Israel tackling wars on multiple fronts? Because Israel has to battle Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen, and now Iran's involvement, especially after the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowing that it will be a year of victory and perhaps giving a guarantee of the eternity of Israel.
So one of the things that we've seen in the Israel-Hamas war, this is Israel's longest war officially in history, and Israel's military doctrine is not prepared for it. Israel's military doctrine going back to the 1960s was Israel cannot afford long wars. Israel always seeks to have short wars because its military strength starts to dwindle. It's a small country, and as you said, multiple fronts. That also is a big burden on the economy. It's a big burden on how much Israel relies on international armaments, and we've started to see several different countries limiting its armament supplies towards Israel. All these things are probably going to be factored in, even in the interceptions that we've seen, both in April and in this most recent attack from Iran. Israel did not intercept all of those missiles by itself. The United States participated, Jordan participated. Back in April, we saw participation of the United Arab Emirates, possibly even of Qatar and Bahrain, that was rumored at that time. Israel has to factor all these things in. Chances are it's going to try to do an immediate reaction. It's going to try to do something very public and say we managed to do that, and then say now we want to refocus back towards Hezbollah, towards the Gaza Strip. Theoretically, in Lebanon, Israel is constantly saying that it is not seeking an all-out invasion. It's not even set as a goal to destroy Hezbollah. What Israel has said is that it wants to push Hezbollah north of the Litani River, and Israel keeps on saying it wants the diplomatic resolution that both France and the United States have proposed. Israel, at least in rhetoric, what it is saying in Lebanon is it's going to continue escalating further, but there it is happy to end the situation now with a diplomatic resolution. Very different than in the Gaza Strip, where Israel is rejecting a diplomatic resolution until Hamas is destroyed, however Israel conceives of that destruction.
All right, Alan, thank you so much for joining us. Your answers are always based on precedent, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining us on World DNA. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah.